Happy Week 10 of the 2023 NFL season, everyone. This is Doug Farrar of Touchdown Wire and the USA Today Sports Media Group. And the guy over there is Greg Cosell of NFL Films and ESPN's NFL Matchup. And Greg, Week 10 in bunches. We've got some extremely interesting matchups. And as always, some cool concepts to talk about. So let's get right into it. Fascinating game here. Houston Texans at Cincinnati Bengals. And
Yeah.
I could spend 15 minutes going through everything CJ Stroud, like every record he broke or tied against the Buccaneers last Sunday. But let's just say it was really good. Like, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, all these yards. And okay, so we know that. We were talking yesterday on the phone, and you brought up the concept of second reaction movement, and it kind of steered into a conversation about the different kinds of mobility. So before we get into two different quarterbacks we discussed yesterday, CJ Stroud and also Sam Howell of the Commanders, I wanted to get your thoughts on what you meant by the differences in mobility, because I thought it was kind of a fascinating idea.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, Doug, just so people understand that, because mobility, and we're going to discuss momentarily, but you and I both know that now it's kind of thrown out there that you can't play quarterback in the NFL unless you have movement traits, and most people think of that meaning you have to run out of the pocket and be able to use your legs outside the pocket, run for first downs, throw on the move, let's say outside the numbers.
Sure.
It's sort of become accepted as gospel that you really can't play unless you're able to do that. Now, obviously, that trait is certainly a good one to have. We've seen the Patrick Mahomes do that exceptionally well. We've seen Josh Allen make special plays doing that. Obviously, we know Lamar Jackson can break the morale of a defense when it's 3rd and 9 and he leaves the pocket and runs for 20 yards. No one is saying that that's not a good trait to have. But now there's a larger question here. Not every quarterback is going to be able to do that. So what is the definition of mobility, and can you be an effective NFL quarterback or even a high-level NFL quarterback if you can't do that? And I would say you can, because I think one of the things that is overlooked is what I think coaches would call operational movement. The ability to move in a smaller area. I've always used the sort of the size of a boxing ring, but it's theoretically even smaller. But the ability to move to avoid pressure and find kind of a quiet place to deliver the football.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there have been quarterbacks through the years that have mastered that art who no one would say were mobile in a strict sense. I'm going back a number of years now to Dan Marino. Tom Brady was a master at that.
Carson
Brady was
Palmer
an
at his peak was like that.
I'm sorry?
Carson Palmer at his peak was like that.
Yeah, there are a lot of quarterbacks like that who most people would say were not mobile quarterbacks, but they had the ability to do that. Joe Burrow is a master at that as well. Now he happens to have very light feet and can also do other things, but you wouldn't say Burrow and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. You wouldn't necessarily say them in the same breath.
No.
So mobility can mean a number of things and be effective in a number of ways. I remember getting back to, you mentioned CJ Stroud and the game he had this past week, which was obviously phenomenal, and he's played really well this year. But a lot of people said that, oh, well, they weren't sure what he could do at the NFL level until they saw the Georgia game. Well, I watched probably 7 or 8 games of CJ Stroud, and while, again, he's not Mahomes or Allen or Lamar Jackson for that matter, few are Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud, if you watched enough tape, you saw that he does have effective functional movement ability. And actually, in the context of that offense, they use him quite a bit on designed boots. Now, that's designed, but, again, he's able to do that and throw the ball accurately off that kind of planned movement. So
that's where our conversation got interesting, because we got into first level and second level reaction movement.
Right.
And Stroud, to me, and if you didn't believe it until you saw the Georgia game, I maintain that you only watched the Georgia game, because, like you said, and his numbers outside the pocket at his final year at Ohio State were actually really good. But I would say that Stroud is more of a first reaction pocket mover with those designed rollouts and the boot and all that. And it's Bobby Slowick, their OC, who comes from the Shanahan tree. So it's all that stuff you see. Explosive plays out of heavy personnel in the boot game and all that. If you compare that to a Sam Howell of the Commanders, I would say that Sam Howell is very much a second reaction. It's like, okay, this thing happens, so now I must do this. With Stoudt, it's more the movement is part of the play. So it's a little, I always compare it to music. Like, if everything in your passing game is predicated on your quarterback having these extemporaneous improvisational moments, it's like all you're doing is playing the solo in the middle of the piece. John Coltrane wrote India, and there's, he solos for 10 seconds in the middle, but he's got a theme and a theme, and you still have to have the theme.
Yeah, now Howell's an interesting guy because he does have movement ability to get out of the pocket and make plays with his legs. But I think one of the things that he's shown, and see, I think this is critically important, is he's shown the ability to stay in the pocket and move within the pocket and therefore make what the term I use is late in the down throws. He has done that very well for a first-year starting quarterback. He does not get flustered by bodies around him. He does not break down. In fact, for a young quarterback, he does a really good job of moving his feet with his eyes. A lot of quarterbacks, they see things, maybe they're looking right, and then they realize, I don't have a throw there, and they feel the pocket being squeezed, and their eyes might go then left to a secondary or third read, but they don't move their feet, and they end up throwing the ball with poor balance, not a firm base across their body. He has just seemingly a natural tendency to be able to move his feet with his eyes. And he'll learn the balance, Doug, as he plays more between, okay, when do I truly have to get out of there, or when do I have to throw it away versus, okay, staying in there, because obviously he's been sacked a lot, although the last 2 weeks he's been sacked a lot less.
Last 4 weeks, and we'll get into that.
Yeah. So, I mean,
for that.
but the thing is quarterbacks that have always been able to move, and here's the balance. And I've had these conversations with coaches at the scouting combine, and they don't really have a great answer. They respond to the result of the play as opposed to the process of the play.
Well, there is no one answer to anything in football.
No, and there's no one answer, obviously. But quarterbacks that tend to move and have been able to do that since they're 10 years old because they're really good athletes, there are a number of plays in which they move prematurely when they don't have to, and therefore they disrupt the timing and structure of the play, and they will leave, the term we use is they will leave throws on the field. Now, those quarterbacks could then run for 15 yards, and it's like that shot in basketball, the 3-point shot where the coach is like, no, yes, so maybe you're happy about the fact that they're going to run for 15 yards and get a first down. I'd love to be in the meeting the next day, because I'm not, obviously, where they talk about it. Do they say, hey, we designed, such and such a route concept.
Yep.
It was there against that coverage. We'd really like you to deliver the football. Or do they simply say, hey, you have great legs, no problem. If you see it and you want to run, just go. I don't know the answer to that question, and there probably isn't one answer. Right. But
well, I think of like Chuck Nolan, Terry Bradshaw, or Mike Holmgren and Brett Favre, where I imagine there were some words.
Yeah, I mean, we know that with Holmgren, because here at NFL Films we had to wind him through the years, and Mike was not one to hold back on the sideline, no matter who the quarterback was.
As a Seattle resident, I can tell you that is definitely the case.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no one answer, but I guess what I would say is the people that automatically say, well, you can't play quarterback in the NFL unless you can run around. I think you have to go into a little more depth and detail with that kind of statement. You have to try to find a little more nuance and subtlety to that, because I think you can play quarterback in this league without being able to run around the way some quarterbacks do, and it's a meaningful part of their game, and they're really good because of it, but that's specific to them.
I would say that if you can play quarterback in the NFL now with the advanced, stunts and games and blitzes, and God, when we get to the Ravens, we'll talk about that. Because, woo boy, if the second reaction outside the pocket, scrambled, okay, but if you can't move within the pocket credibly,
then you can't be a statue. I don't want people to think I'm saying that you can play by just being a statue that can't move at all. Because that's probably not the case in today's NFL, because then there's the risk of too many plays that you're just throwing away, because you can't do anything. But but pocket movement is a very broad term, or athleticism for a quarterback is a very
Sure.
broad term that needs to be much further defined than just, oh, well, if you can't run around, you can't play.
Yep. So a little bit more on Commanders Seahawks, and you do a lot of Eagle stuff. So you remember Howells' 26-yard touchdown pass to Jameson Crowder, where Crowder ran the over route as the inside slot receiver and trips right. Howell moved to his left as Josh Sweat and Milton Williams just collapsed everything inside. Crowder ran through the coverage, but that would have not mattered had Howell not adjusted to his launch point. I think he took 4 steps to his left, and it was just really calm. And he had the ISO hot to the backside, and he's like, no, I'm going to make the FU throw over Bradbury and Blankenship. And it was like, okay, there's pocket movement and a bang throw across the field. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, the Patriots game, it was way more YOLO, much more YOLO. But I saw in that particular play a quarterback who's beginning to understand structure within pocket movement.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because when you watch guys play, you can see the difference between quarterbacks whose movement is, and I think this is what you mean. Tell me if you see it differently, whose movement is sort of calculated and controlled, as opposed to quarterbacks who just leave and then try to figure it out.
Calculated is the word. It's a great word because it's part of the calculation. Your movement is part of the calculation. You're just not
Correct.
avoiding guys and then throwing it 10 yards out of
Right.
bounds. You're moving to. He's looking at Crowder the whole time, like, yeah, I got my guy on the over. All I need to do is, because my offensive line is still what it is, I'm just going to move over here, very calm, understands it, boom.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, I mean, are there going to be plays where the defense wins really early and you just have to move, and then, that's the way it goes. But those plays don't happen 15 times a game. So movement to me, and I think this is what the really good quarterbacks do, and you know me well enough to know I don't automatically say a quarterback's great. I don't talk like that. Just like I would never say a quarterback's generational till he plays in the NFL for quite a while.
I hate that.
But you can tell when a quarterback moves that whether the movement is sort of calculated. And I think that's one of Mahomes' phenomenal traits.
Yes.
Mahomes is so calculated, and he still knows how to maneuver defender. And I'm sure this is innate in his DNA.
Sure.
He
He
can
has
maneuver.
12 eyes all the way around his head.
He can
His
maneuver.
peripheral is
Yeah,
just sick. Yeah.
he can maneuver, control, and manipulate defenders on the move as well as any quarterback that's playing. His movement is very calculated. It's not random. He's not just leaving and seeing, oh, let's see what happens now, And I think you can see that with quarterbacks. Some young quarterbacks, when they get in the league, particularly ones who are very good athletes, they tend to move, and it's, okay, now let me figure it out. And It's really hard to do that at the NFL level.
Sam Howell was moving on that play to get in a position where he could make the prescribed throw, and that's calculated. That's I like that word.
Yep.
Well, in weeks 1 through 5, per Pro Football Focus, Howell was pressured on 38.1% of his dropbacks. He took a league high 29 sacks in 5 games. He threw 2 touchdowns and 4 interceptions under pressure, and to my knowledge, had no explosive plays in pressure. In weeks 6 through 9, 4 games, pressured on 36.2% of his dropbacks. He's been sacked just 14 times in those 4 games. 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions, but he's creating explosive passing plays under pressure. And I don't want to say all of a sudden, because to me, the way I would put it, Greg, is that he is intelligently speeding up the clock. And he's taking the freneticism out of the
that's a good way to describe it. He actually had a play this past week. It was Dotson 24 yards on 2nd and 7 in the second quarter. It's a great example of that. It showed his patience and toughness in the pocket. He made a late in the down throw. He subtly moved to his left as he worked through his progression, and he did what I said in terms of moving his feet with his eyes. And the pocket really got squeezed on him, but he made an unbelievable throw to Dotson for 24 yards. So, like I said, he'll figure all that out. I mean, obviously, there's still an inconsistency to his game as a first-year starter, but you're seeing traits that you really feel good about.
Well, and the opportunity cost. I mean, he leads the league over the last 3 weeks in attempts, completions, and passing yards. So,
if I'm not mistaken, Doug, over the last 5 weeks, he leads the NFL in passing yards and touchdown passes.
Yeah, so Eric Bieniemy clearly trusts him with all the launch codes. For the Seahawks and Seahawks Commanders, real quick. You said yesterday when we were talking about the just overall stuff the beat down that the Ravens, this 37-3 beat down, was not on Geno. Could you
It
kind
was
of go?
not.
Yeah,
But
not on Geno's.
I mean, their O line. It's funny how it works in the league. The week prior, I thought Charles Cross had a really, really good game in the one-on-one matchups he had with Myles Garrett. This week, Cross did not play great, and the O-line just got handled. Now, the Ravens are a very difficult defense to play against because they're not really a one-on-one defense in a strict sense. They don't line up and say, hey, my guy can win one-on-one versus your guy. Although I will say this. I thought Jadeveon Clowney played as well in this game as I've seen him in years, and his body looks different. He looks leaner. He looks quicker. But the point I'm making is,
People often say that of me these days, Greg. Just so you
know. Do you look leaner and quicker?
I feel leaner and quicker. So
no, there you go.
Yeah.
But they're really, really good with their concepts.
Yep.
Mike McDonald's done an unbelievable job. That all starts, so people understand this, that all starts with film study because, you often hear people say, oh, well, they broke down the protection. Well, when you hear that term, what that means is they understand how a team is going to protect in a given situation. Is it a 5-man pass protection concept? Is it a 6-man pass protection concept? Who's the 6th man? Is it a tight end who's on the ball? Is it a back in the backfield? You understand how teams protect with their players. Obviously, we know where the 5 offensive linemen are. But if it's a 6-man protection concept, who that 6th man is becomes critical in how you decide as a defense to attack and break down the protection. I think Mike McDonald does as good a job right now. And again, he's a young coach, but he's doing a great job. Right now, he's doing as good a job as anyone in the league because they lead the league in sacks. And sure, obviously, when you lead the league in sacks, some do come from guys winning one-on-one, but they are really good schematically with what they do. The way they use secondary players, whether it's the slot corner Arthur Millette, whether it's Kyle Hamilton, the safety, they're really good getting these guys involved in pressure concepts. And that comes about because you feel you can either get someone in clean or you're creating a matchup that you feel really, really good about.
You could not
a one-on-one matchup.
Yeah, you could not have teed me up better for this because I wanted to talk about Baltimore's first sack of Geno Smith with 4:01 left in the first quarter. And you said yesterday or last week that the Ravens are really good at getting free guys in, which is rare. One thing I noticed in watching their defensive tape this week is they're very good at they can be 1 or 2 down in the numbers game, rush versus protection, and they know how to beat it. This was a 5-man rush against a 7-man protection. Ravens set up in an overload, looking very much like what the Niners do a lot. Overload to the defensive right side. Roquan Smith, the Fred Warner role, is the stand-up 3-tech. But he dropped to take away Jackson Smith and Jigba as the middle hole defender, which says a lot about Roquan Smith when you can take away, But Patrick Queen replaced Smith as a rusher. He did so stunning to the overload side. Seahawks have a 7-man protection with tight end Noah Fant and running back Zach Charbonnet in the backfield. So it's 5-on-7 in Seattle's favor, and the Ravens still won. Smith's drop had center Evan Brown and right guard Phil Haynes doubling nose tackle Michael Pierce. Queen's loop around occupied both Charbonnet and Fant. They both went to Queen, which is kind of weird. Adafe Owe and Kyle Van Noy and the edges took Cross and Jason Peters out, and that is Justin Madubuike. That was the one-on-one. He took Damian Lewis and threw him out of the club. But that's an example of how you can use scheme to you're 2 down in the numbers battle, and you dominate that rep.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, and that's what they're really good at. And teams like that, that's how they live, is they live by winning even though they don't have the numbers, because it becomes the concept. And as we've seen numerous times, they drop out their 2 defensive tackles, Madubuike, who's a really good player, and Michael Pierce, and they drop them out to rob underneath short in-breaking routes. So they're not matching up. Yeah, they're not matching up to players. So in other words, when you talk about Queen dropping out and taking away Smith Njigba, he's not playing him man to man. He's dropping into an area based on the fact that they know that there'll be a route in that area by the offense. So he's in position to take it away within the timing and structure of the concept, and then the pressure gets there. So don't forget, when you're creating pressure, you're counting on the pressure to work. So you're not expecting, a lot of times you watch tape and you see coverages and you go, oh, that looks like quarters, let's say. But if it's a pressure, it's not quarters. It looks like it, but the
Right.
rules are different.
Yeah.
Because don't forget they're expecting pressure to be a factor on the play. So therefore the rules in the coverage are different, even though it might look like a very typical coverage concept.
Yep. A couple more real quick because we're going more concepts than matchups, which is sort of an organic thing that happens, and I love it. Browns at Ravens. Baltimore's blocking was insane against the Seahawks, almost 300 rushing yards. This is the heart of their highly successful run game. Their passing concepts, hat on a hat all day long. I know the Eagles have the best combination of fronts on the offensive and defensive side. I'm starting to think the Ravens are they're looking up at them, going, "Hey, we're here too." It's kind
Well,
of cool.
the Ravens O line has played exceptionally
Yep.
well, and that is, it's funny. We were talking about this in our matchup room. Is that has allowed Lamar, and a lot of people saying, "Oh, he's not having a great year because he's only thrown I think 9 touchdowns, whatever." He's not putting up a numbers year. But I think the sign of a quarterback that's really playing at a high level is playing to what each specific game demands. Every game is different. He doesn't have to throw. Look what they've done in 2 of the last 3 weeks against the Lions and the Seahawks. Those games did not demand that he drop back 40 times and throw for 350 yards. You play each game as the game requires. And I
Right.
think he's done an exceptionally good job of that this year. There have been games where he's had to throw, and he's done it well. Those 2 games I just mentioned, he hasn't had to throw a lot. So you know what? It doesn't matter that he throws for 180 yards. It's not really relevant. So you can't just look at a number and say, oh, well, he's not up there among the league leaders in touchdowns. He's playing, to me, and I think I've watched every offensive game because I'm very curious with Todd Monken being there and how they're doing it. And by the way, they're still using the Ricard, I don't want to say exactly the same way, but he's still a featured player in their offense.
Yeah.
So he's playing to what each specific game demands. And in some ways, again, I'm not a quarterback, but I would say that in some ways that could be more difficult because what do quarterbacks want to do? They want to drop back and throw it.
Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't praise a team for being able to win all these different ways, and then say
Right.
not doing this thing as much as he did last year. That as you
I mean,
intimated.
the Eagles have a bye this week, so we're not going to get into a big discussion about
Right.
them. But but Hurts this week only threw 23 balls. I mean, so and I think he only threw for about 200 yards. But I would argue he played a really, really good game.
Yeah. No, he sucks because he didn't hit the
Yeah.
he didn't hit the number to ride the ride. So here's a team that has been winning one way and losing another. The San Francisco 49ers. They have lost 3 in a row. Browns, Vikings, Bengals. They've scored 17 points in each of those losses. In the first 5 games, all wins, they scored 33 points per game, 33.4. Rushing in their 5-0 opening, 170. I'll cut down the stats. 4.5 yards per carry, 11 touchdowns, hit at the line 38% of the time. 34 missed tackles, 8 carries of 15 or more yards. Rushing in their most recent 0-3 stretch, 4.1 yards per carry, 95.3 rushing yards per game, hit at the line 41.4%, 6 missed tackles forced, only 1 carry of 15 plus yards. Now, having Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel were both hurt. They were injured in the Browns game, and they were out the last 2. And that plays a factor. But is there anything else you've seen in that run game
Well,
that is a problem?
I think the dynamic of how they play has changed for the reasons you mentioned. They're a team that counts on being able to be balanced in their offense, have the run game present opportunities in the pass game, have their defense keep games together. Their defense has not played anywhere near as well either. So now the whole dynamic feel of games has changed for them because I would argue that Brock Purdy is still playing very, very well. Now, obviously, people are going to point to a fourth quarter interception or a couple and say, oh, boy, he stinks. But he's actually, if you look at the totality of his work, he's actually playing well. But the dynamic of how they're built, how they want to play and how they have to play well has changed because their run game has not been a big factor and their defense, they're not used to being in the fourth quarter of games where the opponent has 24 or 27 points,
No.
So everything changes and it's just a whole different feel to the flow of a game. Every team, this isn't talked about a lot, but every team wants to control the pace and tempo of a game. That's sort of built into how you want to play. You want to be able to control the way the game is played. And every coach has a different view of that, but clearly the 49ers are a team that wants to build up over time, control the game so they get into middle third quarter, and all of a sudden they're winning 24-13, and they've
Mhm.
controlled the game,
Right.
and it just seems like, nothing seems to be spectacular, but all of a sudden you go, wow, they're a really good team.
Right.
That hasn't happened in the last number of games. So everything becomes different in the fourth quarter of games when that's the case.
Well, here's another, and this is again Browns, Vikings, Bengals, where they've gone 0-3, and this may be the nature of the opponent because these are all stacked box teams, stacked box defenses anyway. In the 5-0 stretch where they won, 46% of their attempts against stack boxes, rushing attempts, fourth most in the NFL. Those last three games, 57% of the rushing attempts came against stack boxes, first in the NFL. Jaguars aren't quite like that, but and I don't know whether it's just these are the way these defenses play, or they've identified something with the Niners where, oh, okay, here we can stack it because they do this. But that's the thing.
Yeah, without question. So, it'll be interesting to see because you know how it is when teams have a bye week. The first part of a bye week, even though the players might not be in the building, the coaches self-scout. And
Yep.
then, of course, the second part is they game plan for the team they're playing. So, until we see the 49ers come out and play, we don't know exactly. And by the way, you're not going to see a huge adjustments. You don't have that kind of time. There'll be tweaks that probably you and I can't see. We'd have to be in the meetings to understand that, you know. But the point is they'll make some adjustments that in their mind will be very helpful. But they're built to play a certain way. And it gets to a larger point. And I think the Niners are still a good team. This is my point. Is not the Niners aren't a good team, but
Right.
but I think when you look at a team like the Eagles, for instance, in an ideal world, and not every team can do this, but in an ideal world, you want to be able to play multiple ways and win multiple ways,
Yep.
depending on how a given game plays out.
Yep.
Because when you start playing the better teams or you get into the playoffs, which every team wants to get to, sometimes you can't just play one way the way you'd ideally like to play. You have to play a little bit differently, and you'd like to be able to win or play well multiple ways on either side of the ball. So, we'll see as the Niners come back and play. They're on the road in Jacksonville. That's not an easy game.
No. Well, Christian McCaffrey's yards per carry in that three-game
They've
losing
gone down significantly.
5.2 to 3.4. Now, the Jaguars are relying 3.4 yards per carry all season, which is the fourth best in the NFL behind the Bears, Texans, and Patriots. So,
And they're a
Williams,
5-2 base front, and we know
yeah.
the Niners play a ton of 21, so
So they
we'll
can
see
stack.
how that maps out. We'll
They
see
might,
if the Niners change up. We'll see if the Niners spread the formation more, even in 21, which they're more than capable of doing. Again, these are little things that, until we see the game, we don't know. But, they might not feel they want to bunch everything together and run against that tight 5-2 front.
right. Yeah, pass defense, in their 5 wins, Niners allowed a completion percentage of 65.2 and an opponent pass rating of 71.4. Last three games, a league high 73 completion percentage and an opponent pass rating of 98.7. Not great, Bob. So yeah, they got some stuff to clean up. Final game we're going to discuss: Denver Broncos at Buffalo Bills. We have not, I imagine, talked a lot about Denver's offense, but I will say Denver's passing game is starting to come around. Explosive plays in contested catch situations with play action, very much what Russell Wilson is comfortable with. Wilson leads the league in throws outside the pocket this season with 25 completions and 60 attempts on 72 dropbacks. And that's what he's always been. I know this, you know this. The low passer rating of 77.2 probably has something to do with the fact that he's taken a league high 12 sacks outside the pocket. But Sean Payton seems to have Wilson doing things he does best, for better or worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think when Russell Wilson's your quarterback, there's a couple of things you live with, and they lived with in Seattle. He obviously had a great run game and a dominant defense, and that makes things a lot better overall. But you live with the fact that he's going to leave throws on the field because there's certain things he can't see, or there's certain things he's not comfortable with. So you have to live with that. But the one thing when he's playing well, and this cannot be overlooked, is when he's playing well, he does not turn the ball over. And
Right.
that is a really, really important thing. It doesn't show up in a stat. People look at a quarterback stat and they go, oh, look at his, completion percentage, look at his touchdowns, look at this, look at that. But he doesn't turn the ball over. And yeah, he might take some negative plays. He gets sacked too much, some of which are on him, as we know, going back to his Seattle days.
Which
But
are
you know
off.
what? Of course, in Seattle, it was okay because if he gets sacked on third down and they punt, normally they got the ball back pretty quick because he was playing with a great defense. But that's the thing about Wilson is he can make plays outside of structure and he doesn't turn it over.
Yep. Moving to the Bills offense, I know you have some thoughts on this. I have two. They're running
What are yours?
A lot of two-man route concepts and a lot of defenses to man up on both receivers. I don't see levels. I don't see like crossers to mix it up. Also, we talked about this last week when they played a bunch of speed no huddle, and Josh Allen.
They did not do this week.
Well, it's interesting when they did and they didn't. Josh Allen told Kevin Clark of the Ringer this week that no huddle slows the game down for him. If I'm his OC, I am putting that in 48-point font and going with it. They ran no huddle on 5 of his dropbacks in the first half of the Bengals game. And Dorsey pointed to like game script and situation. When the second half started, they were down 21-7. They started to use it more, 14 dropbacks, and Allen completed 9 of 13 passes for 77 yards and a touchdown out of no huddle. After the game, Sean McDermott said, when asked why it took so long to push the tempo, said, "I don't have a good answer for you right now. I've got to look into that, but I know what you mean. I saw that at the end as well."
Yeah, but that became a reaction to the game as opposed to a proactive way to play the game.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So
I would say
they didn't do it in the first half. They did it in the second half, and then it was like, what? What are we doing?
So I would say this, and again, we're not in the building, but no. I would say that the Bills' offense, in some ways, is exactly the way it's always been, except for one thing, which always bailed them out. They made explosive pass plays. They're not making explosive pass plays. Okay, this is not contrary to what people believe. This is not a highly talented offensive group. They've got Allen, who's a high-level talent. They've got Diggs, who's a great receiver, but not a vertical dimension. Okay, they're trying to work Kincaid in, who could end up being very, very good, but he's still a rookie, and they're figuring it out. They don't really have a second wide receiver, contrary to what people might think. They've got an average to below average offensive line. And no matter how much they try, they do not have a run game. So they're not a very talented offense.
And right now, their defense is just demolished by injury. So
correct. Yeah. So their defense, while it's solid, certainly it's not low end, but it's not dominant by any means. So they're really the same as they've always been. It's just they used to make big plays in the passing game. It's pretty remarkable that their record over the last 3-4 years is what it's been because they have been so Josh Allen centric. And I know he's become an easy target now and people would be wrong. I mean, is he playing the best football of his career? No, I'm not saying that. But essentially, this team is built on the ability of Josh Allen to be special. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to do that. And if the big plays are not there, they've got a little bit of an issue because they can't really move. Now they've developed into a very condensed passing game that doesn't really attack defenses at the intermediate and vertical levels with route concepts and combinations. So now they need to go 10, 11, 12 plays to score. It's hard to do that without a run game.
Yeah. Well, and what you said about scheming it open and that whole thing. I think when I went back and watched his interceptions this morning in preparation for this, and I'm like, their defenses are kind of smelling what you're cooking here, guys. You gotta do some different.
Well, the interception he threw this week was not a bad read; it was a bad throw.
Yeah, but in any case, well, Greg, you are the same. You are as always, completely awesome. Great games this week in Week 10, and we'll be talking more X's and O's with you next Wednesday.
All right, Doug. Thanks, my man.